let's look at wind. So this is wind over, also roughly the last 30 years. Wind has come down quite a bit. And when people look at this graph, what they say is, this is a mature industry, okay? Basically, there's no more cost down left. I look at this and I say, well, basically what happened in the last decade is that wind cost of electricity was basically stable or increasing over that decade. So wind had a lot of cost reduction catch-up to do heading into the economic crisis. So what happened? What happened, and what is continuing to happen, is from 2008 to 2010, the upfront cost of wind came down dramatically, okay? So if in the US, I'll give you US numbers, in 2007, 2008, if you want to buy a wind turbine, you'd buy it on a forward price of about $1.6 to $1.8 million per megawatt. Okay, that's turnkey for just the turbine, no balance of plant costs. Today, if you want to buy that turbine and you have reasonable scale, you can buy that turbine at $1.2 million per megawatt. That's a huge price reduction. What's amazing about that is that's a price reduction that is achieved in the US market without the Chinese or the Koreans selling any meaningful volume into the US market. So the whole oversupply that came into the solar sector and that caused dramatic cost reductions together with the economic crisis in solar has not even happened in wind yet, okay? And the result of that, in my opinion, is going to be further significant drops in the wind costs of electricity. So I think the big news here, rather than looking at, oh, this is a mature industry, the big news, in my opinion, is in certain parts of the world, in particular in places like the windy Midwest of the US, wind is this close to being the cheapest form of electricity, bar none, okay? Nobody ever talks about that, but Oklahoma Gas and Electric just signed a power purchase agreement for 3.8 cents, US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. That is, in my opinion, the big news, and it's continuing. So let's look at my claim. My claim is wind very soon in many parts of the world will be the cheapest form of electricity, period, onshore wind. Before we go into that in a little bit more detail, let's first understand over the last decade, there was basically no incentive for wind turbine OEMs to really improve their LCOE. So what turbine manufacturers did was basic engineering work, making the turbines larger, making sure they actually last for 20 years, okay? But there was very little in terms of fundamental technical innovation. Now, it's very, very obvious to even the last Western turbine manufacturer that they are about to face huge price pressure. Within 1, 2, 3 years, Chinese turbine manufacturers make 50% of the wind turbines in the world, okay? They're making them largely for the Chinese market. They will make them for the European and US markets. If Clentech and Trina and all those solar companies can sell panels into the US and into Germany, they'll be able to sell wind turbines into those markets as well. So that's coming. The wind turbine manufacturers know. And the only way they can compete is on fundamental technical improvements. And that's why I'm excited about where the cost of wind is going. Not only will there be huge price pressures on upfront CapEx due to competition, but I think there's fundamental innovation coming down the pathway as well. So I think these dynamics are good, just in terms of where the cost of electricity is going. And let's look at this graph here. And again, I'm taking conservative third-party data that I think is wrong, okay? But I'm putting it up there to illustrate a point, which is you have to form your own view of where gas is going to be. I believe wind, certainly in the US, will be priced against natural gas. And if your view is that gas is at $5 per MMBTU in 3 years or $8, depending on your view, wind will be the cheapest form of electricity either on a subsidized or an unsubsidized basis, okay? I actually think it will be well below 5 cents per kilowatt hour on an unsubsidized basis in 2015. I think wind is going to start showing 50% plus capacity factors in the US Midwest, and I think people will be surprised at how dramatic the cost reductions will be. But what this shows is that as the ultimate buyer, you have to basically make a decision around how much volatility you want to take into consideration. Do you want to have zero price volatility, which you have with wind, or huge potential price volatility with natural gas. So LEDs is, everybody's probably seen this graph. What is important is LEDs have come down in price dramatically and have improved in performance dramatically over the last 50 years. Where they are now is the speed of those cost reductions is actually increasing. If you've seen the number of MOCVD reactors that are being built in China, Taiwan, Korea, you know that this trend is only accelerating, okay? And LEDs are very, very close to being viable. Now, when I go to my lighting installation expert around the corner and I'm talking to him about upgrading my kitchen, he tells me, and he will tell me for the next 3 years, that it doesn't make sense for general illumination. But the fact is, LEDs over the next 5 years are going to come down by at least 5x. So what's going to happen is I will go to him every single year, and every single year he's going to tell me for the next 3 years that it doesn't make sense. And then when I go to him in the 4th year, all of a sudden, the only thing he'll be selling is LEDs. And it will happen overnight, and all of a sudden, that's the only option I've got because it's crossed that chasm, and all of a sudden, it not only does it make sense for a niche market, it makes sense for every market. Batteries, electric vehicles. I think we can all agree they're not there yet, right? So EVs make sense for certain niche markets, short-haul buses, short-haul transit or delivery. Those are markets that I think within 3 years will be dominated by electric vehicle drivetrains. But again, the static analysis is not the right way of looking at it. If you're too focused on historical prices, what you'll miss again is EVs just aren't there yet. And 5 years from now, all your friends are driving EVs because it's just cheaper to do that than for a diesel or petrol-fired internal combustion engine. To put this in perspective, just yesterday, one of my colleagues told me that for one of our portfolio companies, they are now getting bids, okay, for battery, this is just for cells, at $190 per kilowatt hour. Obviously, you have to put packaging costs, et cetera, on top of that, so you're not there yet. But the point is, we are very, very close at this point, and we are again in an industry that has huge competition, both in terms of performance, but in terms of costs. And if there's one industry that's really good at getting costs out of their supply chain, it's the automotive OEMs. And so again, from that perspective, it's an industry where we are, in my opinion, again, within 5 years of a replacement of incumbent technology. I think we are at a tipping point. Investors have an obligation to look 5+ years into the future and to think about what is the world going to be like when they exit. And in my view, if you look at the cost curves, what that tells you is in 5 years, these technologies will have dramatic adoption. That's why we're excited about this sector. Cheers.
Michael, we love your cost curves, and we have 3 more minutes, and then we take a coffee break. We come back here at 11:30, 11:35, and then our second room, Wind, over there is starting to run with all the startup pitches. And now we have maybe 1 or 2 more questions for the master of the cost curves, Nikolaus from Discovergy, looking for money.
We are in the energy efficiency space, and I've seen that you invested in an energy efficiency company called Opower. And I'd like you to maybe just say 1 or 2 sentences on how the cost curves might apply to a company like Opower.
I think Opower, quite frankly, is just an amazing business model. Okay, I'm not sure obviously the cost curves, to some extent are complementary to what they're doing, but they just have an amazing business model where they've figured out that you can actually change people's behavior. Their perspective, and we agree with it, we've invested, is the way people change their behavior is if they're compared to peers. So if you know that your house is the most energy consumptive in your block out of comparable houses, you are probably, and they give you, 2 or 3 tips of behavioral changes, you are probably going to change the way you behave. And even if it has a minor impact, it is the cheapest way of generating additional kilowatt hours. And that's why we invested in Opower. It's not so much the cost curves.
One more question.
Did you ever invested with success in Europe?
We have in the Cleantech portfolio, I think 8 or 9 investments in Germany.
Shimpei Yamashita from Sumitomo.
when you have the cost curve going down, let's say in photovoltaics, you have people in the cell-making industry providing over-competition, oversupply to drive down the prices. What that implies for those people doing the innovation is their margins are getting squeezed. And right now, the profits in the photovoltaic value chain is not being taken up, not mostly by the cell people, but in the upstream, and maybe sometimes in the far downstream. So with that in mind, how would you think about investing in people doing technical innovations for something that's going to happen 5 years in the future?
Sure. I think the most important thing is you have to be realistic. So if you kid yourself about the cost down in the industry, you're going to get crushed. So the technology better have a serious competitive advantage. Then again, companies like Trina in China, they are doing 35%, I think something in that range, gross margins. They're doing just fine, and they're leading the industry in terms of cost reductions. Companies like First Solar that have a serious competitive advantage versus silicon PV are doing just fine in terms of gross margin. So I think even in an industry like that, you can make money. You just don't want to be a me-too product.